All right, welcome everybody. Good morning. So in this session, we're going to talk about the modern data estate. I'm Gene Garcia. I'm a principal engineer with Microsoft Education. And I have with me today, David. David, you want to do a quick intro?
Sure. My name's, like Gene said, my name's David. I am the administrator for the Office of Data Management and Application Development for the Department of Education in Nebraska.
All right. And we were going to have Kevin with us. Unfortunately, Kevin has a personal emergency he has to take care of. So it'll just be David and I today. All right, so let's talk about the modern data estate and why education is embracing this paradigm shift. All right, so from a high level, the journey map is largely the same as it's always been. And it's about having your data, trying to get to insight, and going through the basic stages of discovery, data prep, building out reports and analysis, and then operationalizing the whole process. And so, the fundamentals of the journey haven't changed, but there has been at least a shift with regard to empowerment and using data to empower our people. And so, I have a little image here of this book, the SelfService Data Roadmap, democratizing data and reducing the time to insight. This idea of democratizing data is part of what's new to the modern data estate. It's about bringing in all the data from the silos, but then providing the right level of access to the right folks to empower your team. All right, so the data analytics journey, this is the journey that every organization in every industry has been on for quite some time. And it comes down to the questions of what kind of value are you getting from your data, and are you getting progressively better at getting that value? So at a high level, well, we can look at these little stops along the way in the journey. The first stop being one of descriptive analysis. So, being able to just describe what has happened. And it's non-trivial, of course, because you do still have to bring in your data from all the various silos. You have to be able to apply the right level of analysis to it just to understand what has happened. The next point being diagnostic analysis. So being able to have some insight as to why it happened. The next point, predictive analysis. So now getting into machine learning and more advanced analysis, recognizing patterns, being able to predict. And then finally, prescriptive. So given all of that, what do you do about it? How do you take action effectively? So at a high level, it's like hindsight, developing insight, developing foresight. And how do you progressively get better at those three stages? So, we used to talk about the data warehouse being the way to do this. And so here's a graphic from Databricks that describes at a high level the progression that has occurred. Back in the 80s, it was all about really expensive, really large data warehouses that are heavily constrained relational data stores, where you're bringing in structured data and you are taking a long time to do a lot of transformations, and then load this heavily constrained schema, right? That was the approach for a long time. And then we got into being able to use data lakes, right? And having semi-structured and unstructured data, right? Using NoSQL, but being able to bring data into a data lake quickly and at least land it and then operate with that data, still taking a lot of time to load up a data warehouse, and then having reports and BI on top of that. And then finally, the lake house is what Databricks calls it, is an approach that brings together the data lake and the data warehouse into one architecture, where it's really the data lake that has been made to have the functionality of a data warehouse. And so you have the benefits of a data lake and the benefits of a data warehouse in one approach. The Microsoft way of describing this is as a modern data estate. And so it's not necessarily the case that the data warehouse is out the window. It's more about the data warehouse needs to be justified. It's not always necessary depending on your use cases. And so the modern data estate is like this, where you have all these different sources, these different silos of data that you want to initially do the ingestion, right? Using a cloud-based integration platform as a service, like Azure Data Factory. And then land that data into the data lake. So the data lake is the foundation. This is still part of what Databricks would call the lake house approach. But then being able, after you've ingested that data and done some initial prep, you still have the option of serving that data in a data warehouse if it's necessary. If not, you're still serving it from the data lake itself, and then having the visualizations in Power BI. So this is the Microsoft conception of it. And if you dive a little bit deeper, you can think of it this way, where not only is it about ingestion, but it's about the prepping of that data and bringing the right compute to the prepping of that data. So having flexible compute that's separate from the storage is a key piece to the modern data estate. And then being able to transform and enrich that data iteratively over time, and then finally serving it up perhaps in a SQL data warehouse. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the common differences between the traditional data warehouse and the modern data estate. And this again is from the Service Data Roadmap book by O'Reilly. I'm not going to read all this out, but and by the way, these slides will be available to you, so you can go back and review. But at a high level, data formats are a key piece here, being able to handle semi-structured and unstructured data characteristics, cataloging data. So this is being able to effectively slurp in metadata, right, and then be able to search that metadata so that you have a better understanding of what's available, and so that you're empowering your team to understand what's available. And then the freshness of insights. So having this data flowing, right, and processing it. The query processing approach, again, having decoupled compute just adds a lot of flexibility in what's possible. And then data services. So having that data lake that is then available to cloud-based data services to take full advantage of the data that's been centralized. Another way to describe this is, again, another slide from Databricks describing key pieces of the lakehouse. So it's not like everything in the data warehouse approach has been thrown out the window. It's that it has evolved into this modern data estate. So there's still transaction support, right? That's still key. It's just that this transaction support is now available in a much more flexible storage. And again, there's a lot of details here you can refer back to, but schema enforcement and governance, BI support, storage is decoupled from compute, like we've talked about, openness, of course, support for diverse data types. This is key too, because landing that data initially used to be a big hurdle. Getting data into a data warehouse is non-trivial because of the transformations that are needed and all the data cleansing and the relational constraints. With the lakehouse, a key piece here is that first stage is just landing the data in whatever format it's coming in. Support for diverse workloads and the end-to-end streaming. All right, so I want to talk now about two key technologies that make the modern data estate possible. The first is Apache Spark. It's been around for a long time. It's an open source resource that allows you to apply compute in a way that effectively parallelizes the work. So there is a centralized driver program that divides the work and then distributes it across these worker nodes. And this has been used for quite some time. Of course, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it and have used it. What's new, and the reason why education is embracing this more than ever before, is because this tech has been increasingly democratized. the level of effort needed to stand up and administer a Spark cluster is come way down, right? And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The other key technology here is the data lake and Delta Lake on top of the data lake. So Delta Lake is another open source project coming out of the Linux Foundation, and it adds a lot of key features to the core data lake that makes the modern data estate possible. So it provides features like ACID transactions, scalable metadata handling, streaming and batch unification, schema enforcement, a feature they call time travel, which allows you to actually query back in time and see how did the data change from a previous point in time. So Delta Lake is a game changer in empowering effective use of the data lake. All right, so we have those technologies, but as far as like democratizing those technologies and making them easier to use, we have Azure Synapse as an example of a stack that makes it far easier to tap into this power. And so at the top is the Synapse Studio, and this is one unified UI that allows you to tap into these things. At the bottom is the Azure Data Lake Storage, or whatever data lake storage, which can be conceptualized as a file system in the cloud effectively. And so in the middle, you've got the platform, and the platform provides a lot of really powerful utilities that make the whole modern estate easy to operate, or relatively easy. So the first level there closest to the data lake is data integration. So having the right pipelines in place and the orchestration to schedule the execution of those pipelines is a key part of the platform. And I'll show you a bit about that in a minute. And then having the different analytics runtimes. So whether it's using Spark or still using SQL, if you have a large investment in SQL, right, that's part of this as well. And then the form factors, provisioned or on demand. A lot of what we're talking about can be done in a serverless mode and really bring your costs down. Or you can have the advantages of provisioned compute if you need to to reach certain performance levels. And then the various languages that are supported, allowing you to take advantage of whatever skill sets you have available in your team. Let's see. And then all of this is made available through Synapse Studio, because a big part of the innovation here is the ease by how easily you can access these tools. And we'll talk more about that in a minute too. But I want to get through the rest here and then hand it off to David. This is my last slide. It's key that this one interface allows you not only to access your various pipelines and data prep scripts, but it also allows you to handle the versioning of all these assets. And so effectively empowering your team to follow best practices as they continue to evolve their modern data estate. And so with that, I want to hand off to David, where he's going to talk to you about the work that Nebraska has been doing in developing their modern data estate.
Thanks, Gene, and good morning, everyone. I'm super excited today to talk about Nebraska's journey kind of through this and to kind of set some context. Kind of just break it up into 3 sections, kind of some historical context, as well as kind of where we are in the process right now, and then really where we see this going in the future. And so, Gene, you can advance. So, if anyone knows anything about the Nebraska history, several years ago, we embraced the EdFi standard to kind of help simplify our data collection process from half a dozen sys vendors or so. And, really with some modification and some, enhancements, we made use of that. Very simply stood up three 3 single year ODSs, each year you add a new ODS. And so it presents a pretty well structured environment, right? And so, the truth is though, Gene, if you advance this, our environment, in the ODS world looked great, but we had all these other data sources. And I think this is probably more akin to what most people think of when they think about all their data, right? And so, we had some really, really well oiled machinery around the EDFI standards and the ODSs and everything. And it did a great job of collecting that data, but we had text files, we had other SQL databases, we had Excel files, and even a little maybe a little embarrassed to admit, we still have some access databases floating around there too that were kind of siloed off, and only one person knew what was going on. And so it's as chaotic as it sounds, I think it's really more a representational example of probably what most people's data environment tends to look like in a lot of ways. And so we started thinking through all of these data sets, where they were, and you can go ahead and advance, Gene, but we really applied, we took that thought and applied for a SLDS grant in 2019, which we received. And the work of that grant was to essentially adopt cloud architecture, build a data lake, and really begin to start breaking down a lot of those silos. It should sound very familiar to what Gene was describing, right? And so we worked with some Microsoft partners, got a little training on Azure, selected Azure as our cloud platform of choice. But in the meantime, we were having conversations with Microsoft and Microsoft Educate around this thing called Project Constellation and open education architecture and or alliance. And really it was kind of this aha moment where it's like, hey, what you guys are describing in your scenario is almost exactly describing where we want to go and what our grant was supposed to be doing. And so we really continued a lot of those conversations and came to the realization that we could, this was a great way to get into the data lake concept, leveraging a lot of the work that had already gone on ahead of us, but also maybe helping establish some patterns and processes that other states could then leverage as well in their own work around this. And so kind of in Q2 of 2021, we'd been working with Microsoft and kind of thinking through these phases of work, and really we kicked off this phase one set of work, which was really around identifying some MVP questions we wanted to ask of our data, and that allowed us to essentially prioritize what data was going to be targeted into the inclusion into the data lake, right? We have to start somewhere. The goal is to get it all included into the data lake, but you got to start somewhere. And so that was really the purpose of phase one. Phase two, which is actually where we are right now, was really then to take this data lake and all the pieces that Gene was describing with the lake house, which we don't have a lake house. I wish we did, but we're getting towards the lake house concept, right? But to start using some of those pieces then built into Azure around AI and machine learning and starting building out some models, maybe identify some additional data that we need to bring into it, but really leveraging the framework and foundation that was laid out in phase one, and then start adding some of that kind of that foresight pieces to it as Gene described. And then phase three, which we'll hopefully kick off here shortly, is around then leveraging maybe something like Microsoft Dynamics to surface and share a lot of the visualizations that are coming out of this work. And so, Gene, you can kind of advance to the next slide. And so, like I said, this is a screenshot of some of our beta testing work that's coming out of the visualizations from phase one and phase two. It's interesting because some people might look at this and say, well, it's great, but really what's the meaning behind it? But the questions we were asked or wanting to ask of our data was really in a very exploratory nature that we hadn't been able to do before. We wanted to, you can see on the screen, there's 3 student characteristic populations we can kind of define on the fly based on whatever data's in the data lake. And so, we got the data brought up to the data lake. We were able to then build out our structures necessary to then start asking these questions. And then just through a simple drop down, and Gene talked about democratizing data access. This really is it's not quite a query builder, right? But it's kind of in that vein where our business, what I call business logic people, but our education experts can come in and start building these questions out of the data that they simply weren't able to do before. And, maybe comparing, certain demographics or certain characteristics, and why is this population not doing as well as this other population? And then, then based on that work, then we start asking the questions around the machine learning and AI. Is like, how do we then leverage that knowledge to build those models to give us the foresight around what do we do about that, right? So we've identified populations that may not be performing as well, but then really what is the root cause of that, or what are some causes of that? How can we address that? Like, why is one district doing better than another district, and really trying to identify those pieces. So we're very much in the midst of building those out. This is, like I said, this is only one of probably 24 report screens that we have built out, ranging from, like in this case, it's around our state assessment, but we also think about all the other demographic elements we have, chronic absenteeism, even teacher population and certification around how that impacts student outcomes. And as you can hopefully tell, we're starting to bring together a lot of data sets that then hopefully will yield some insights into the system as a whole, as opposed to what was maybe traditionally very siloed insights or even siloed exploration of the data, which was great, but I would argue it fell short of being transformational in the system. And I think we're verging on this path of being transformational in how we ask questions of our data. And you can, last slide here, Gene. So, thinking about where we go from here, right? First of all, one of the biggest lessons we've learned through this entire process is to reframe how we think about data, how we think about the questions we're asking of our data. And that's only possible because we're able to break down the silos across all those data sets and bring them together in kind of a single location. And so certainly part of our future plans is to continue adding data and adding visualizations. It's a really basic thing, but the idea is to ultimately encompass all of our data. And I was going to do some slides in here around what our Azure environment looks like. And I was looking through Gene's slides, and I was like, the slides Gene provided, if you go back to like slide 13 or 14, as you're reviewing this, it's like, that's exactly what got built out. And, we were able to build this out with Microsoft's help, but we were able to build this out in just a few months, right? We were able to get to this point. I mean, it was certainly less than 6 months for sure. And so, and then now we have this framework where we can just, quickly drag and drop and build and bring in additional data sets. And then, the other side of that, and this is probably the piece I'm most excited about, and the last 4 points, all 4 points on the screen, all kind of allude to this. We can now build out data sets on demand, by demand, right, for the right audience. And so we can kind of use the tools to, maybe create an application specific data mart, or expose a certain set of data through an API, depending on what the requests are, right? We want to meet our stakeholders where they are and not maybe kind of constrain it. And so we can wrap security around it. We can wrap different technologies around it. Probably one of the ones that I think is the most interesting right now is that creating some district and school data sets. And so really we're exploring this capacity to actually invite district data stewards in to our tenant, our Azure space, and have their data carved out for them that they can then kind of attach and view compared to maybe statewide data, and really leverage this investment we've made into this cloud data lake architecture, without needing huge amounts of training, huge investments of their own in this, and really bringing a little bit of maybe an equity piece across all of our districts, large and small. And so anyway, that's, if you can't tell, I'm really excited about that possibility. So I'm just going to wrap up and say, I know I didn't go into a lot of technical detail here, but we're always more than willing to connect, maybe on a more one-on-one basis. And around any of this work, really excited to share it, invite you into the OEA platform around that. But anyway, so if you do have questions or you want to reach out, by all means, we're really thinking around a lot of transformational pieces around our data. And so it's an exciting time. So thanks, Gene.
Yeah, thank you, David. We really appreciate the partnership that we've had in this journey, and we're learning a lot from the work that you all are doing, and incorporating that into our approach as well with other customers and partners, but also in our own products. And so, I just want to speak briefly on within Microsoft 365, we have a product called School Data Sync that uses OneRoster to facilitate the syncing of roster data into the M365 platform. And we have on the roadmap using Caliper to receive the events from LMSs, and in an effort to augment the data that we're already gathering inside of M365 across the other applications. So we have today this insights product. I'm going to show you real fast. We're capturing usage data in an internal data lake, right? This is our internal modern data estate, and then building products off of that, such as class insights and insights for leaders. And what's exciting about this then is that we're learning and building our modern data estate inside of M365, but then we're also sharing this data out to customers. So customers can request to receive this student usage data into their own Azure subscription and get updates on that daily. And so then it becomes really central for us to be able to advise and facilitate around best practices, which is what we've been doing with Nebraska. And so that's why we've started down this process of defining a reference architecture. And this is the quick elevator pitch. I know we're almost out of time here, but at a high level, right, it's the age-old problem of you want to build a modern data estate because you want to be able to bring in siloed data and collect it effectively so that you can apply the right level of compute to it, the right level of analysis to it, and give the right people on your team the right level of access and the right tools so that you can derive the insights that then feed downstream systems or help empower other members of your team. And there's a lot of different ways to do this, but by adding some structure to the approach and having an opinionated framework, we can effectively commoditize a lot of this across the industry, right? And as a platform company, that's what we're looking to do, is empower the ecosystem with a reference architecture so that we can commoditize the low-level plumbing and allow the market to differentiate at a much higher level and better serve customers like Nebraska. So we've defined this reference architecture. We call this the whole community we're calling Open Education Analytics, and it is a community as well as technical assets. So we don't have much time to go into detail, but I guess as a call to action, or at least an invitation to action, I would encourage you all to look at our openeducationanalytics.org site. This is what we used when we were helping Nebraska get kickstarted. It's a great, strong starting place that you can then build on and iterate over and take advantage of some pieces that have already been built, but then also contribute back to the community as we commoditize this low-level stuff and make modern data estates in education far more common and easy. I think that pretty much wraps up our time. I don't know. Let's see. Kara says there's no audience questions. So I think we're right on time. I hope that was helpful. David, any last comments or questions?
No, just thank you, Gene, for all you've done. And I was just kind of rethinking through that last slide where it's like, yep, that's exactly where we are. So anyway, it's really neat to see. So thank you.
Excellent. All right. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you, Gene. Thank you, David, for this session. And thanks to the audience for joining. Have a great rest.